ask all of our speakers for this session to come back, and we have some time now for questions. We have a microphone out in the audience, so if anybody has any questions, now's the time.
It says on.
There we go.
So some years ago I made a presentation at this conference as a businessman talking about the value of regulation and the fact that it actually, regulation I think creates jobs and saves money in the long run. And I've always had this sense that the idea of leaving asbestos in place just because you don't want to disturb it is a way of putting off costs, because eventually they're going to demolish that building. Eventually that cost has to be paid. So what you save in the short run is the time value of that money, that future payout. And yet we keep hearing stories, as we've heard just from all of you, about, as Tony pointed out, you know, you always go in and you find asbestos broken up in the attic.
It's more rare that I don't find asbestos
right.
than I do.
And so it brings me back to the question of, are we better off pushing for a program, at least in the United States, because it sounds like it's happening in Australia, to go in and remediate it where we find it, and not wait for it to become a problem? And I'd like you to comment on that.
Anybody want to tackle that? Go ahead, Tom.
I'll just start it, but I'll let the other guys kick in. I think that that's a great thought, and I tend to agree with you, but good luck with that. We have completely defunded the TSCA program, Title II, which is a HERA. There is no money left up there other than the fact that we do some audits in schools and there's very few fines written. There's not a person in Washington that could answer a phone call. As a matter of fact, there are very few people left that even in EPA that understand the vagaries of a HERA as a mass group. Okay, same thing with the asbestos NESHAP under clean air. And really we are only regulated to do demolition and renovation removal, so you're talking about massive changes in statutes. That's the problem. They don't have the stomach for it right now. Go ahead. Any of you guys might agree, disagree?
Every week there's millions of dollars of lawsuits paid in this asbestos stuff. And why? Because we don't want to do it now. It's asbestos credit card. We can just simply pay the bill off and get it done and eat it and we'll be better.
Well, and I think it's very, very political. I just, between giving my little talk and going and sitting down and looking at local news in Oregon, they just appointed a fellow who is an attorney, high-powered attorney firm attorney, to be the head of DEQ while they're looking for an interim director. And this is someone who has done a lot of law that has nothing to do with environmental law. So, you know, if you're not invested and you're in these public positions, it's not going to happen for the public. I mean, if public health is not at the forefront of that person, really, how's that going to work?
Paul, I think my colleagues up here would likely agree with me that I'm of the opinion that if we had effective and vigorous enforcement of our existing regulations, it would take us exactly where we needed to go. I know the climate for new regulations is very, very difficult, but we have abysmal enforcement of our existing regulations, and I think it would pay for the programs themselves if we enforce those regulations, but we can't seem to get any traction with that either. Would you guys agree with enforcement of existing?
Yeah. Well, let's just go to the OSHA side, which is worker protection. And I'm not going to speak for where he's from and specifically, but I watch the whole country. And generally, OSHA offices will only respond to complaints. They do not do any kind of site visits. And it's only if the workers call. If I call and see something, they won't go, but that worker has to call. That's the way this works. So that's just one small angle, okay?
I want to touch on one thing. That we talk about being unable to manage risk or identify asbestos-containing products and then obviously managing the risk. There is a bill in Congress called the READ Act, and that's Senator Durbin, and then there's House Member Delbany. If we knew where asbestos was on consumer shelves, because we don't have a ban, and I know you've all told me that you can still buy it, we could vote with our dollars, but our inability to see what's contaminated makes us, it really disempowers us. So there are some bills while we fight for TSCA and a ban that we can support, and I would encourage you guys to check our legislation page because we are a stakeholder and EIA works closely with us and we really want what's safe, but if you can't identify it in your home and then you have the spin of propaganda, it leaves Americans at risk. So I'd love to build that page out and have all of you. And John, on a side note, you've been terrific. When we've had what we think could be an OSHA violation, John has in the middle of the night written letters and helped us to try to navigate when workers could be at threat. So thank you for your vigilance.
Brent?
Marilyn.
This is kind of a layperson's question. I remember doing gardening when I was a kid with vermiculite, and I still see vermiculite on shelves in terms of fireplaces that are I have a gas fireplace and it has some stuff in it. I don't know, is that vermiculite? Is that the asbestos vermiculite, or because it's not labeled as such?
With vermiculite in the United States, the things that we're mostly concerned with is the Libby deposit. That is Libby-amphibole fibers, and just a very important part of that, we have tremolite, winchite, and richterite. There are two non-regulated forms of asbestos which are clearly asbestos. The health report just came out, the toxicological report on Libby, just within the past couple weeks. And the EPA now calls them Libby-amphibole fibers, and they are a cancer risk. They don't separate them anymore. Okay? Now, as an example, there in South Carolina, there's a vermiculite deposit in Honoree, South Carolina, that does not have asbestos in it, and it shows up all over the South. So I have to tell my students not to panic if they get a negative on a vermiculite, because it may not be the Libby stuff, although we have plenty of Libby. So there are other deposits that have been exploited over the years, primarily that South Carolina deposit that don't have it. We have stuff that comes in from South Africa that doesn't have asbestos in it, apparently. Fisher Scientific stuff and some other manufacturers, Sean, I don't remember which, but there are a number of them that show up that do not. So I would not panic necessarily that you have what we had with Libby when you buy vermiculite in the stores. Sean, you may have some other things to say. I don't know if these other guys do.
Well, just from a geologic perspective.
Sean's our mineralogist here.
Sean Fitzgerald, I've done some of the testing with ADAO, got a lot of testing, a lot of different materials. The way vermiculite forms in the earth is conducive to co-mineralization with asbestos. The one type of vermiculite that contains the most asbestos is the deposit in Libby, Montana. However, the Henry, South Carolina, and Louisiana County vermiculites also do contain some level of asbestos. That's Virginia, right? Just not as much as what we saw in vermiculite in Montana. Perhaps the one that in the peer-reviewed literature with some least amount of asbestos is the Palabor formation in South Africa. That's much more expensive than domestic sources, but it's what we more often than not use when we put vermiculite products there.
Thanks for clarification. Other questions?
This is for John and Tom, I think it is. Or yeah, Tom and John. Tom, you mentioned, I think, that you have some information on schools. I have 3 sisters that are educators, and I would love to get as much information in front of them. And we're from Illinois, and I know, John, your examples really scare the hell out of me with Illinois. So anything I can get in front of my sisters to help them, and one of them is a principal, so I mean, really would like to get it.
You know, it's really an interesting part of AHIRA, this awareness training that's required. It's not required for teachers. It's required for the maintenance people. And I have people that run school systems that come in my classroom that wouldn't even consider putting teachers in awareness classes. They're afraid they'll panic. That's true. No, I'll be honest with you, there are a number of things that are very useful. If you want to email me, I'm sure my information is somewhere in here. I've got a pile of it. There's a thing EPA just posted to their webpage, which we were kind of unaware of. It was a self-study guide for AHIRA compliance, which I think you would find very useful. And it kind of takes you from soup to nuts. And there are various other documents I could send. So if you send it to me, I'll create like a little folder. So if anybody sends me something on schools, I'll just blast you the folder, okay?
Great idea. We have time for one more question.
My question is for Brad. Brad, the Asbestos Safety and Eradication Agency, that's funded by...
Oh, there you are. Come on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So
Yep.
it's federal in Australia?
Yes, that's correct.
And...
So under the former Labor government,
Yes.
In their dying days, they were able to establish the Asbestos Safety Eradication Agency. But look, it's budgeted for. Certainly it's going to take some time. They have a strategic plan, which I can go into with you later. But certainly, yeah, it's funded by the federal government. That's correct.
So there's a plan in place, it just hasn't been implemented.
Oh no, there's been a number of plans starting. They're moving towards the implementation. So it's a step-by-step strategy, and that's occurring now. So, and I actually sit on one of the committees that looks at the building, construction, demolition sectors, and all those sorts of issues. We recently had we've got a ban, as you know, in Australia, but we recently had some switchgear that was imported into Australia by the Chinese, essentially. And some 64 sites were identified around the country. But look, that was minor, I guess, but it's still a problem because Border Force Security Australia, whatever they're called now, you know, they're too busy trying to fight terrorists and, you know, all that sort of stuff, money laundering and international criminality, they told us to be vigilant about that sort of stuff. So, look, there's a problem, but, you know, we're campaigning hard.
Good, thank you.
I wonder if I could follow up on that question, just with the budgeting. You're saying it's budgeted. What we often do here to compel corporate behavior is to offer tax incentives. And what I'm wondering is, how is it budgeted in Australia? Is it through a tax on the mining industry, or is it a surcharge of any kind?
No, that's not. It's just
straight up budgeting? Straight
up budgeted. No, I think it might be a good idea to, I mean, we looked at possibilities of having levies for the industry, so everybody contributing in the industry to lessen the burden, but no, it was straight out budgeted, so, yeah.
Anyone else?
Wait.
Linda's on her way. You're not allowed to speak until you have a microphone in your hand. Unless you're Sean Fitzgerald.
So I work for a union that represents workers in the meatpacking industry and also supermarket retail. And my question is, I've been to a pork plant, for example. This was at least 100 years old. And there's other very old plants like it, and there are some new ones. So the question is, are meatpacking plants a target for OSHA? Would you say that there should be some red flags around that, or is that something that has possibly been eradicated already, asbestos in those meat plants?
Well, I would say that depends on the meat plant. I mean, I've gone to like Hormel and other meat processors, and they still have asbestos. They, as one of the other members here said, it's just encapsulated, don't touch it, which is, you know, the problem, because, you know, forklifts never hit anything in their life, so.
That's right.
No, in the long run, what it would be is, think of OSHA as what they call emphasis programs. That's the important thing with the federal OSHA programs as well as the regional and state programs. You got to know what their emphasis programs are. And in meatpacking, it wouldn't be asbestos. They look at repetitive motion injuries, they're looking at hand protection, things of that nature. Most OSHA people that would come out to a site like that have absolutely no knowledge and training on asbestos issues. Matter of fact, a minority of OSHA people in this country have a training in asbestos issues.
Hi, I'm Mary Catherine Fletcher with the AFL-CIO, and I just more kind of had a comment and an appreciation for what you've been saying about how we really need to be proactive with the people who we have in the government. Is OSHA's current budget only allocates $3.71 per worker. So when you're talking about enforcement and we need more, we need OSHA to be funded more so they can actually protect these workers.
There are more fish and game folks than there are ocean inspectors, says Dr. Lemon. We are going to conclude this session. You guys did a great job, and have a break and then reconvene. Well done.